This is a ministry team. So from this point on, this is not in any sense of imagination an open gym. This time is set aside for us as a team to prepare to do the ministry that we have been called to do. And so this is a preparation time from October through April. This is prison basketball's ministry time. So if you have somebody that you think could be involved in this ministry, you need to take the initiative to let me know that ahead of time. Don't just bring them here on Saturday morning, because that's going to be very, very awkward. Because I'm going to just say, sorry, you just have to sit here and watch this morning, or whatever. So don't do that to me. Don't do it to the team from this point on. And it's not meant to be exclusive, that we won't let anybody in, because as you know, the last few months I've encouraged you to bring people, and we've got a few of them here that have been brought, and we want to grow the team. But once we get started trying to develop into a team, you guys know how hard that is. We have to build into being a team, and we just can't have guys showing up every once in a while who may or may not be a part of the team. So from this point on, it's like a team practice, and so we will still invite people in if they really do know what they're getting into and they're going to make that commitment. But that will mean that you talk to me beforehand, then we get them to watch the orientation, we talk through what they learned in the orientation, and talk about their commitment, and then they're in. Okay, but that's a little bit harder to do in mid-season, so that's where we're going. So the ministry team, it's for those that are committed to being a part of the ministry team. That's what I assume that you guys are. So once we get through this full orientation for you three new guys, if you hear anything that you're just uncomfortable with and you feel like you can't commit to, then I just ask that you be, man enough, straightforward enough, just come to me, talk to me about it. Just say, hey, you know what, I don't think this is for me, whatever. So the assumption is going to be that once we go through this, if you show up again next week, that you're giving a thumbs up and you're in, all right? It's not just a great workout, it's not an open gym. It's invite only, we talked about that. It's not a club, it's a ministry team. So what is a ministry team? A ministry team is a team that serves, and we're going to talk about that. But it's also more than, and I've had a couple of conversations with you guys during this last year, it's more than just a goodwill venture. I mean, there is goodwill involved in us going in and giving the time to the inmates and to the institutions, but it's meant to be more than that. It's meant to be a gospel ministry team. We come right alongside of a gospel ministry called Brother Bob's Outreach, which is going into the prisons and is actively trying to help the inmates get a handle on their relationship with God. So let me just, and this is one suggestion from a couple of you, let me just remind you of what the basics of the gospel are, and because we represent this when we go in there. And it's basically this, that God loves each one of us, and he wants a relationship with every human being. And he says that in the Bible, and he wants that relationship. But the problem is that sin entered the world through Adam and Eve, and they're our ancestors, and so we each have a sin problem. Every one of us has a sin problem. The Bible says we've all sinned and fall short of God's perfect standards, and it says that the wages of sin is death, which is both ends up being a physical death at the end of our life, but also a spiritual death of being separated from God. And so because of that sin, there's a separation with God, and so that relationship with him can't happen. But God still loved us so much that he gave us a solution, and that solution is Jesus Christ. Probably the most popular Bible verse of all time. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. And so he sent Jesus to earth to live and to die for each one of us, to cover our sins and become the solution to the sin problem. And so because there needs to be, the wages of sin is a death, so Jesus becomes a death for all of us, a substitutionary death. His blood covers our sin, and we now can be back in that relationship with God. Okay? The key to it, though, is that it becomes a willing choice for each one of us. And I don't get that just because my family grew up taking me to church. I don't get it just because I walk into church. I don't get it just because I walk through the doors and I'm part of this ministry team. It's a personal decision that each one of us makes. It's a personal decision that each one of those inmates we play against has the opportunity to make. And one of the beauties of the whole thing is it's one of God's greatest gifts to us is he gives us free choice. So he doesn't cram himself down our throats and force us to do it. He doesn't make us into little robots. He gives us a choice of whether we want to accept that free gift of his Son to have forgiveness of sins and have a spiritual component to our life. And if we choose to accept that, he promises to come in and create that for us. And then benefits are one is that we have a relationship with God, a daily relationship with God while we're living out our life. But then also at the end of our life on earth, it's not the end, that we are ushered into heaven because of what Jesus did for us. That's the gospel presentation that really each one of us should be ready to make if in fact an inmate, you ever had an opportunity with an inmate that said, hey, what are you guys really all about? Now, obviously, I have never ever given that presentation to an inmate at a basketball game. I have at softball games, because there's far more time to sit and whatever, and sit in the stands with inmates or whatever. But that's really bottom line what we're all about. That's why we go, because that's what Brother Bob's ministry is all about. We go under the banner of Brother Bob. It's important for you to know that. If you're uncomfortable with that, then you shouldn't be going in with us. I mean, you still can come Saturday mornings and work out with us, but if you're at some place where you're not comfortable with that message and how it's living out in your life, not saying that we're all at different places on our spiritual pilgrimage. And so, but if you're uncomfortable with the message, that that's really what we're all about, then then you probably shouldn't go into the prisons. So let's go beyond that though. The ministry team. So it's a team that serves, and it serves out of that. Really, the first and foremost, we're serving the Lord. Colossians 3:23 says that whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for man, because you know it's the Lord Christ that you're serving. So we're going as a team right now. I mean, you can go to lots of gyms in Milwaukee on a Saturday morning and play basketball. We're coming here to prepare ourselves so that we can serve the Lord by going into the prisons and becoming a vessel of His love and truth and grace to the inmates by just being in there and playing with them. I mean, I've been involved in a lot of ministry adventures, but I just tell you, I don't know any that are more fun than sports ministry, because you get to do something that you just absolutely love to do, and yet you're still able to serve the Lord in the process. Romans 12 says, I urge you therefore, brothers, in view of God's mercies, to present your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. And this becomes an act of worship. And so, what a great thing. And I mean, that verse is not just for athletes, but I think it's perfect for athletes. You know, athletes lay their bodies on the line to play their game. Well, in this case, we get to lay our bodies on the line to play a game we love, but also as an offering to the Lord that we love, and saying, hey, we're going to use this game that we love and the gifts you've given us to go in there and serve you by being in with the inmates. So we do that on a regular basis, and not only do we do it when we're serving the inmates, but we do it when we come here in the morning and serve one another. And we'll get to that in just a minute. And secondly, we serve in the prisons. We do go to serve in the prisons, and we don't just go to play a game. We go to serve. And so that means, and that serving comes in the relationships we develop. And so those relationships, when we're talking to Mark as we walk down in Oshkosh, and we're building relationships with the officers by simply being respectful and whatever. The relationships we have with the inmates and the scorers and the referees and all those things, that's all part of our serving them. And we need to keep that in mind. And you guys that have been in have heard me share this with the inmates. You know, in Hebrews it says, God tells us, remember those in prison as if you were their fellow prisoner, and remember those who are mistreated as if you yourself were suffering. And so God tells us that what He wants for us is He wants us to remember those in prison. And I've said it to the inmates, and I say it to you, I couldn't do that. I couldn't live out this in the same way that I do by going in and spending time with those inmates. Because I would pretty quickly, with everything else going on in my life, I would pretty quickly forget about them. But God says it's part of our responsibility as His children to remember those in prison and those that are suffering, those that are mistreated, as if we're right there with them. And so we are serving in the prisons. We go to serve there. Thirdly, we're gathered, and this whole ministry team idea is that we're here to serve one another. I've talked about that. We come on a Saturday morning. Proverbs 27:17 says, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. And as I shared earlier, you guys are my extended family. I mean, you guys have sharpened me over the years by our interaction, by the times that I've blown it, by the times that I've lost perspective on serving in the prisons and end up arguing with the referees and whatever. And you've straightened me out and you've reminded me, you've stood alongside of me as I continue to grow in this whole relationship with the Lord and everything else. And so there's a sharpening that goes on, and it needs to be in the forefront of our minds when you're walking through those doors. I mean, every time you walk through those doors, you ought to think of this verse, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. Because that's what Saturday mornings are supposed to be about. Is that we're sharpening one another for, yes, our ministry in the prisons, but we're also sharpening each other just to live out our faith on a daily basis in the relationships we have. And so that's part of what we do together. 1 Timothy 4:7-8 says, rather train yourselves to be godly, for physical training is of some value. And I love this because there are people in my life that have told me that sports ministry and sports are a waste of time. And you can't say that if you read the Bible, because the Bible clearly says that physical training has some value. But it also says that it should never become the top value, which for a lot of athletes and a lot of our sports crazy culture, it has become the top value. And that's where it gets in trouble. Physical training has some value, but godliness has value for all things, serving to help us during our life now, but also in our life to come. And so that's partly what we're doing. We are training ourselves not just for our ministry here in the prisons and while we're living on earth, but we are training ourselves forever. We're training ourselves for godliness, that what God wants us to be and what He wants us to become. And so we can't, it's easy to lose sight of that as we come in to get a good workout. It's easy to lose sight of that when we have all sorts of stresses during the week and we just can't wait to get a good run in and we come here. But that's part of what happens on a Saturday morning, needs to happen on a Saturday morning, and I'll talk about a little bit more of the specifics of that. Okay, so we are a team that's a ministry team here to serve, right? Qualifications. First qualification is that everybody involved in this team, whether you're going into the prisons or just simply coming on a Saturday morning, every one of you needs to have a heart for God. And what does that mean? Heart for God means that you are open to letting God do His work in your life, wherever it happens to be, wherever you are in your relationship with God. So if you have not come to a point of saying, okay, I'm accepting that free gift from you, and I am walking with you or want to know you in a personal way, that's still okay. You can still be a part of this team as long as you are still open to checking that out and figuring out what that means, and that you're willing to say, okay, I'll let you do your work in me if you want to, God. So that's the number one prerequisite. You need to have a heart for God. And that means a lot of things. I mean, it means, you know, it means that you're willing to put your ego and your pride aside at times, and that's part of why it's so silly that we would have arguments about a foul call out here that would end up causing a rift in a relationship between teammates. I mean, that just shouldn't happen if we're really having a heart for God and letting God do what He wants to do in our life. And so that's the first prerequisite. In Colossians 1:11, it says, Paul prays a prayer for the people that God would unleash His power in their life. And that should be your thought and your prayer. That, you know, God, I want you to unleash your power in my life. Even if I don't know you yet, I want you to unleash your power so I get to know you. And that's the number one prerequisite, a heart for God. Secondly, is that you need to be a team player. That means that you need to be committed to a unity and togetherness. It means that you can't live with yourself if a situation like we had last week happens, where there's a dispute about a call and somehow there's a rift in a relationship because of a call on the court. That's not building unity or togetherness. That's building division. So the prerequisite is that you're so much a team player that you are taking responsibility to do your part to make sure that this team can become the team it can be. So that's the second qualification. The third is temperament. And that's partly why I require before you go into prisons that you come and play on Saturday morning. Because, you know, we can't have a situation where somebody, just because of their temperament, and I know, we're all competitors. Some of us are more outwardly intense than others. But I know that in order to compete in this game, you have to be an intense competitor to be successful. And so, you know, your temperament, and some of us do a better job of keeping that under control than others, but your temperament becomes really, really important. Not just on a Saturday morning, but really more in the prisons. Because remember, back in 2010, our whole ministry, but every visitation ministry got shut down in the prisons because of one situation. It had nothing to do with us, but one situation where somebody lost it, and the whole prison system got shut down to outside teams coming in and doing things. Okay, that's how important it is. So we can't take a chance of taking somebody in that's a loose cannon, that's going to lose it and do something that's all of a sudden going to shut us out. So that's why temperament is really, really important, and that really sort of comes down to me making that judgment. And I've had conversations with at least a half dozen guys over the years about how they respond in certain ways here on Saturday morning, and saying, unless you work on that and clean it up, you'll never be able to go into prison with us. Now, some of them have chosen to do that and have gone into prison with us. A couple of them have decided, maybe this isn't the ministry for me. But that's just part of it. So temperament. And then the fourth thing is basketball skills. We need to have skills. Basketball, we've taken teams in with basketball, volleyball, and softball. Basketball is the one game where we have to have a certain skill level or we lose all credibility. We just can't go in there with any 5 guys. And honestly, a lot of times we shouldn't be going in there with 5 guys, because within, as good as our 5 guys could be, by the end of the game we'll be, our tongues will be dragging. We've done that. So we need to have certain skills to be able to be going along. And so there needs to be a certain skill level. There needs to be an effectiveness of using that skill level within the team concept, all those kind of things, and those are the prerequisites. The fifth prerequisite that was added since Philip Griffin became our senior pastor is that he just talked about the 6 marks of a disciple, and basically his charge to the whole church, and we fall under Elmbrook's umbrella as a ministry of Elmbrook Church, is that every ministry, every person involved in ministry, every ministry offers these opportunities for a disciple with 6 marks. And the first one is that they live a transformed life. That's all about this opportunity to come into a relationship with God and then live it out in your life. Secondly, that you gather with the church for teaching, which means for corporate worship. And so that means that you do have a church home, that you're regularly going to church. If not all year long, certainly during this prison season, you need to be doing that. And it doesn't necessarily have to be Elmbrook. You go to whatever your church home is, but you're gathering with the church. You need to connect with a small group, but we do that a little bit. But we're also, again, I'm going to offer, starting in January, we're going to do a small group, probably on a Thursday morning like we did last year, to anybody that wants to come, and it'll be a growth group. And what that means is we'll go through some Bible passages, we might do a study together, whatever, but we're going to spend time together connecting, both relationally but also spiritually. So if you're not involved in a small group and want to be, just let me know that, and we'll get that set up. You need to serve according to my gifts and abilities. Well, we do that by using our gifts and abilities. You need to be giving to the church, to God and to the church. So giving to a gospel ministry, really honestly, first and foremost, your responsibility is to give to the church that is feeding you. That's your number one responsibility. But then there's other opportunities that God just says that you can use the talents and the resources I've given to you to support my ministry. And so you need to be a giver, and then finally multiplying as part of discipleship. So those six things need to be a part of this ministry, and they are, and you are a part of that. So what does it look like? This is down to kind of the nuts and bolts. 15 to 20 games. It's a combination of the regular team and the 35 and over team. Last year, I think we played 5 35 and over games and 9 regular season games. We were 3-2 with our 35 and over team, and we were 2-7 with our regular team. Right? So what that means is, and whenever we see that shift happening, it tells me that we need to do a better job of continuing to grow this team and bring in some new young talent and build them into the team. So that's one of the reasons that we kind of tried real hard to bring some new talent in, because we want to be competitive. I mean, bottom line is our credibility doesn't really come with wins and losses, but if we don't ever win a game, eventually they aren't going to be very excited about us coming in. I mean, that won't happen for a couple years, honestly. I mean, real honestly, you guys have gone, you realize how much of a treat this is for those inmates to play an outside team. But they, and they might not admit it, but they want just like we do. I mean, I always said the greatest ministry situation we can have in a game is that it's a tightly fought game, it goes right down to the last play, and they're successful, and they beat us in the last second. Because after that, they're all excited, and they want to talk to us, and they want to interact with us. We all know as an athlete what it feels like when you have a heartbreaking loss right at the end. And so when we win those games, you know, you've watched it if you've gone in there. Sometimes the inmates don't want to even talk to us. They feel like they have egg on their face, you know, in front of all of their peers in the institution. And so we will never play to lose a game intentionally to try to have that ministry opportunity. But when the losses come, as disappointing as they are because we're trying to win, the neat thing about this ministry is there's a value there that comes with the loss. And that is that we can build a relationship, we can still serve as long as we have, you know, competed. But a lot of times, as you've watched, I mean, I've watched it early on, there's times when we've been in a game for 3 quarters and all of a sudden in the 4th quarter, they just blow us out by 20 or 30. I mean, I remember this very clearly, one of our early games at Fox Lake. I mean, we were in the game until 3 minutes left in the game, and all of a sudden they threw on a full court press, and within 2 minutes, they blew a 4-point game into a 26-point game, and the whole gym cleared out before the game was over. I mean, it was just like the inmates didn't want to have any part of it. And so we have to be competitive. We go there to be competitive. And so it's really, you know, it's really important for us to put a good team on the floor every time we go. So we'll try to do that. The number of games is pretty much determined by what I hear from you guys after this in terms of what kind of availability you think you're going to have during the year. Because real honestly, and I won't, I mean, I'll tell you face to face if I've given you a label, but I've labeled some of you guys A+ players and A players. And not everybody's in that category. I'm not in that category. But some of you are. And in our regular games, I do not want to go unless we have 2 A players. A or A+ players going, because we need that kind of firepower on the floor to be able to compete. And so, I mean, and so a lot of that goes into my putting the teams together and whatever. And so I need to hear from you how available all of you are, because that helps me then to communicate with the prisons. Yeah, we'll come, you know, 15 times, or we'll come 20 times. So if I start hearing from all of you guys, well, I don't know, I might only come to 1 or 2 games. If that's across the board, we probably will cut it down to 10 games so we can send representative teams each time. So that interaction is really important that I get from you. Practice on Saturday morning. We do practice and devotion, like I said. Saturdays, we will start at 7 right up until the first of the year, and then we start at 6 because we'll only have the gym from 6 until about 7:45 because upward basketball comes in here and starts at 8. And we'll still have that arrangement where they'll let us stay here until 7:45 as long as we help them quickly put up the chairs and whatever and get the gym set, and it takes about 5 minutes when we all do that. But until then, as the schedule says, we'll start at 7 right from now until the end of December. And the practice will be, again, short devotion, led by myself or Lyle, or maybe one of you guys will recruit you to do that, and then we'll get playing, you know, whatever. We'll work on whatever we need to as a team. Okay, here are the assumptions. One is each guy wants to grow spiritually through this experience. So you're here not just for the basketball, and there's nothing wrong with looking forward to the basketball. I look forward to the basketball. There's nothing wrong with that, but there should be a real desire, not just a phony one, a real desire to grow spiritually through this experience. Secondly, that each guy is doing something, some personal spiritual training besides just this. And really, I mean, whether that's making sure that you go to church every week, or it's being involved in a small group study, or doing daily devotional reading, I mean, all those things are disciplines that you can be doing to get yourself spiritually ready. It's really easy for athletes, I think, to think about that. I mean, if you're going to just use this Saturday morning as the only time to be ready to go into the prisons, I mean, literally, it's the only time you do anything physical to have yourself ready to play basketball Saturday morning, and you walk into the prisons, you're going to be in for a rude awakening. We all know that as athletes. We would never do that. We train ourselves so that we're ready to compete and be ready. The same thing is true spiritually. Because spiritually, you can't be ready and I can't be ready. If Saturday morning is the only thing we do to then walk into the prisons and have that intensity of what happens, we won't be ready to do what God wants us to do. So we need to have, there's assumption that we're all doing something personally to build into our lives from a spiritual standpoint. And if you don't know what I'm talking about there, or you want some tips on what you could do, talk to me about it. And I'll give you some tips of what I've done and what other people have done. Thirdly, each guy will communicate regarding your specific commitment to the team. So I need to hear from you how much you're going to be involved, how much you think you can be involved. The games are typically played on Saturdays, usually leaving mid-morning, 10:30, 11 o'clock, and we don't get back until 5:30, 6 o'clock. or Wednesday nights, leaving at around 5-ish and getting back around 10 or 11-ish. So that's typically where we play. Fourth assumption, we see this as a team. It's different, a team is different than just a group of guys that gets together to play the game. Come here on Mondays and Fridays, and there's just guys playing the game. But they're not teams. And they might act like teams for a little while they're trying to play together. But a lot of them don't even do that when they're playing together. It's just a bunch of guys trying to get a workout in and happen to play basketball. That's very different than the dynamic of a team. We need to be working together to create a team atmosphere where there's a bond and a commitment and a trust, both on and off the court with one another. So that's part of that's the assumption, is that you're all committed to that. And that's part of what I'm talking about with things that happen on the court. We've got to take care of them before we walk out the door, because that's what teams do. We make sure we take care of those kind of things. Each one of us needs to take an intentional approach to building relationships with other teammates, whether that's sitting with them when you're not playing, or making sure that we take care of any friction that we feel. And I talk about that verse, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. Well, to sharpen iron, there's friction and there's sparks for the sharpening to happen. And so that will happen with us. But the idea is that we don't let the frictions and sparks turn into a fire, but we actually let it sharpen the blade. Okay, so there's a difference there. We need to do that. My role, I'm the director. I used to be the pastor. Now I'm just the director of the team, which means that I serve as coach, general manager, combination. I do play sometimes. I guess we use that word loosely these days. But and so when push comes to shove, I decide. And there's others that are going to help me in this role. I mean, John has in the past, Lyle has and will. John Graham's isn't here, but he's done it. And I may even tap some of the rest of you on the shoulder to say, hey, I need you, will you be willing to be, a team leader for a game or two? I think David has done that role once in a while for us when we've needed that. So I delegate to other guys because I can't be here all the time. But when push comes to shove, I'm the one that's gonna make the decision about who goes and whatever. I decide who plays and who sits. And if I'm not there, then I've delegated that to somebody else. And this very seldom becomes an issue. When we go, you guys have gone with us. No, when we go, everybody plays and everybody gets significant playing time. But when it comes down to the end of the game in a close situation, a team leader is going to decide who's on the floor. Just like every team that you've ever played on, there's somebody making that decision. And so that ends up probably being me or my delegated person. And what you need to know about me is I'm not a power guy. Those of you that know me know that that's true. I'm not a power guy. Although I do have pretty strong opinions about how this game should be played. I have pretty strong opinions about the strategies we need to use to be successful in the prisons. And so that comes into the way I lead and the way I coach and the way I expect us to play. But I'm learning all the time. I was just at the Wisconsin basketball coaches clinic yesterday in Madison, and I listened to Dick Bennett and Rob Jeter talk, and both of them said, and I don't know if you know much about either one of them. Dick probably more than Rob is pretty set on how he thinks the game should be played. And not a lot of people think that the game should be played the way he thinks it should be played. But it's hard to argue with the success he's had because he gets teams to be successful. But Rob Jeter plays a little bit different, but he grew up in a system with Bo Ryan, playing for Bo down at Platteville and then coaching with Bo, that he was pretty much convinced that running the swing offense was a pretty successful offense. Well, he's talked about it, that he's realized that the swing, though he still thinks there's great value in that, they've also added a whole bunch of ball screen options and things in there because that's the way the game is turning. So I understand that. I don't necessarily think that that's the best way to play, but I do think that has to be part of the game now. And so, what I'm saying is I've got some strong opinions, but I'm still learning and growing and expanding my thought process on it all. So I would love to have dialogue with you if you think, hey, we're just, the way we're playing just isn't working or whatever. I'll have dialogue, but that dialogue can't happen in the middle of a game in a prison because that's an inappropriate time to have that kind of dialogue. It needs to happen in the van on the way up or the way back or here on a Saturday morning or getting together for lunch or whatever, and I'm open to that. I sort of have an open door policy on that. And so I want us to be successful. And real honestly, we'll have a different style of play, if you will, based on who goes to whatever game. It's just based on the talent that we have on the floor. Okay, so, but that's my role. I've agreed to the leadership responsibilities, so I'm answerable to Elmbrook for what happens here on Saturday mornings. I'm answerable to Elmbrook for when we go in and represent them in the prisons. I'm answerable to Brother Bob, people, because I'm the point person. What does that mean? Well, a few years ago, we had a situation where, in a game, one of our players got called for a technical and got tossed from the game because he went after a loose ball and dove, and when he went after a loose ball, he went after like a football player and he took out an inmate. Didn't hurt the inmate, but he could have. He could have blown out the inmate's knees. The rec department viewed it as a gross, aggressive act with the attempt to hurt an inmate. And they were really upset. And so they kicked him out of the game for the rest of the time, told us, we don't ever want him coming back into our institution. communicated that to Brother Bob communicated it to me. They didn't really tell us that when we left the institution. That all happened the week after. Well, I got that call, and so I made the trip back up to Green Bay and met with the warden, the rec director, and then with the whole team and apologized for what happened. Okay, that's leadership. That's what I have to do. You have to understand that falls on me. So there's a lot of stuff that happens for me behind the scenes. A couple years ago when we had to cancel the game at Fox Lake, I met with Dick Bowers from Brother Bob. I mean, that was egg on the face for the Brother Bob ministry. And he and I, had to go and talk to the warden, and he wrote a special letter, and we did a bunch of things behind the scenes to try to make sure that our ministry was still happening. I'm not saying that I get a pat on the back, but you guys got to understand there's things come with being in the leadership of this that go far beyond what you see and maybe hear sometimes. So it's a serious deal, what we're doing here, and so there needs to be a responsibility and a give and take. But that's why I'm the one that makes the decisions about who goes, who doesn't go, who plays, who doesn't play, those kind of things, because I have history and I have responsibility. With each passing year, I become more and more of a seasoned vet, less and less capable of playing. Last Saturday, I told some of you, it was humbling for me last Saturday, because obviously my skills are deteriorating and my body is not capable of doing what it does. I'm saying that from the standpoint of that doesn't change my role. When I'm out there as a player, I'm still the director and I'm probably still even the coach. And so when I'm coaching you, what you need to understand, and a lot of guys have told me, you don't need to say that, we know this, but I think guys need to hear this. When I'm coaching you, I'm not coaching you to put you down. I'm coaching you to build you up. I'm coaching you so that you can be a better player, that we'll be a better team. And I understand that there are times that I'll coach you in something, and 2 minutes later, the same situation will come, and I won't do it. And I won't necessarily, in front of everybody, say, oh, Ralph, you need to do that. And sometimes I do that, but a lot of times I don't. But I do coach myself when I'm playing too. In fact, I coach myself harder than I coach any of you guys. You just have to understand that about me, because otherwise we can have situations on the court where all of a sudden I'll try to coach you, and it'll feel like it's a personal confrontation. And that's not what it's meant to be. And if you feel like it is, I ask you, I beg you to call me on it. Just take me, get me at the bubble. Get me standing on the side and say, hey, when you said that to me, I felt like there was a little bit of edge to that or whatever. Because you know what, sometimes there will be, because I'm human and I get fired up too. But that's not my intent. My intent is to build us up as a team, and so I will be doing some coaching. I'm going to demand a different kind of respect from you guys than when I've been player coach. Because as a player coach, I can impact things out on the floor, but if I turn into the coach on the sideline and I'm coaching and you choose not to listen to me, there's going to be a different kind of relationship, and it's going to just have to be that way. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And that doesn't mean I'm going to turn into, Bobby Knight throwing chairs and whatever. That's not me, and that's not my style. But it does mean that when we do something on the floor, and this has happened already, when we do something on the floor and you choose to do something completely different than what the team is supposed to be doing, you'll end up on the bench, not on the floor. And that, that should be happening now anyhow, but it happens less because when I'm out on the floor, I can deal with out on the floor versus when you're on the bench. So just talking about that. All right. We try to play a helping man-to-man when we play man, which what that means is, I say it all the time, you'll be in the gym on an open gym situation and somebody will say, who is that guy? Who's got that guy? And yes, that's an appropriate question to some extent, but with this team, that's not an appropriate question. It really isn't. Unless there's a guy just draining threes and nobody's covering him, to find out who is supposed to be trying to stop him. But if somebody's scoring on us, it's a team problem. It's not an individual problem. Okay, and so that means that we'll do some drills about the help side and all that kind of stuff and whatever, but we play a helping man-to-man. And we have to be a helping man-to-man because of the guys we're playing against. We'll also play 2-3 zone, 3-2 zone, and maybe even a little 1-3-1 zone. And yes, this year we are actually going to practice that on Saturday morning. In fact, we'll practice it probably more than you guys want to, because we typically play zone in the institution 75% of the time. And so we've got to get better at it. We've always talked about it. We've got guys that don't know, how to play with one another, or they haven't played zones, or they don't know what we're trying to do. And so we're going to work on that Saturday morning so that we're a little bit better at it in prisons. All right. Offense, we run a motion offense. When they're playing man-to-man, it's a read and react offense. It means that there's purposeful movement. And the read and react part of it, Dick Bennett was talking about this. He thinks the most important thing we as coaches can teach young players is to see the game, to see our teammates, to see the defense, and not just run a pattern or whatever, or do what we want to do. And so that's part of what this offense is based on. It's a catch and see. When I catch the ball, I look and I see and I make a decision. It's and we do that because we don't have enough time to run a pattern offense that every single guy would know how to do it when we get into a prison, and that would be inappropriate. But this is meant to use all of our skills and abilities to their utmost. And so it's a motion offense with just some. It's playing basketball. That's what it is, but it's playing together. So it's working with one another, read and react. We need to finish our cuts. I'm These recent years, I'm the biggest culprit here because I don't like to waste steps. And so if I start making a cut and I think it's not going to lead to something, I have a tendency to stop. Well, that doesn't help. I need to make a cut and drag my defender through it, because every time I do that, I might open something up for a teammate. That's an important part of a read and react offense, is that when we're cutting, I'm not just cutting for me, I'm cutting for the 4 guys I'm playing with. And yes, it might lead to something for me, but it might not. In fact, probably 4 out of 5 times, it doesn't lead to something for me. It leads to something for somebody else. So we need to finish our cuts, not just when we're open. We need to pass and move. And this gets particularly important for us in prisons late in games. And we do a pretty good job of this in the first quarter, but late in games when we get tired, this is hard. And the offense comes to a grinding halt. We need to pass and move. So even if I'm at the point and I pass, and I think that my guy's not going to cover me here because he hasn't covered me the whole game up here, and I'm just going to be open again, I still need to move. So that means I might have to at least take 2 steps cutting, like I'm going someplace, and then replace myself. So if there's some sense of movement, forcing the defense to make some sort of reaction and movement, which creates options for your teammates. All right? So it's pass and move. It's help somebody out. So I'm not just trying to get myself open, I'm trying to get a teammate open. And I might do that with a cut, I might do that with just spacing on the floor, I might do that with something more aggressive like a screen for a teammate who can come to the ball. So that means oftentimes on a motion offense, I'm going away from the ball. I'm not just trying to come to the ball, I'm going away from the ball to create something for a teammate. And we have to have that part happening too. There needs to be typically floor balance or an intentional imbalance on the floor. So that the floor is spread and there's options on both sides for the guys to ball. And then there's reading the defense and your teammates to be most effective. And of course, that's why it's so important for us to play on Saturday mornings, so we get used to one another because we read each other. When anybody playing with me these days knows that if I have a choice when I'm at the wing to either go to the basket or flare to the corner, what am I going to do? Shout it out. Flare to the corner. Okay, that's important that you know that about me. Okay, and that's what we have to learn about one another as we play. We all have tendencies. And it doesn't mean that I don't ever go to the basket, but it means that if, you should have pretty good sense that if my defender goes in to help to stop you driving the basket, I'm going to be sitting in the corner because that's my tendency. You all have tendencies like that. It's important that we learn those things, and that's why it's important for us to play regularly together on Saturday mornings, because in the prisons, we need to use all of what we've got. So that's what we're trying to do, all right?